Has anyone ever heard of one of the most censored movies ever? Is anyone familiar with the censorship process? Hello, Scenesters. We have a little bit of a different one today. We're going back to 1992 for what Martin Scorsese called one of his top 5 films of the 90s. And I think it was either Siskel or Ebert that said Harvey deserved Oscar gold for this one. We'll be talking about Abel Ferrara's gritty exploitation piece, Bad Lieutenant, and digging around while talking about Catholicism, among other things. Back in 1992, Bad Lieutenant got released in theaters as an NC-17 movie, which means no children under 17 admitted, even with parental permission or accompaniment. Then, over in the UK, its VHS release was heavily censored and cut. The overall censorship of this movie is interesting because they didn't just reduce violence or nudity from the film, but forced producers to change songs for tone, and trim down scenes involving drug use. The reasoning might seem self-evident, but the director of the British Board of Film Classification, James Furman, made some really interesting points regarding why VHS or physical copies of films face different censorships than theatrical releases.
The big difference, of course, is that cinema has a gatekeeper at the box office, and therefore you can control, to a certain extent anyway, audience age. There's also the possibility that video will be viewed in a different way. In the cinema, you start at the beginning of the film and you go through, as the filmmaker made it, in his time, to the end of the film. You get the whole context, which may have justified leaving a scene uncut. Whereas on video, even those who are interested at the beginning of the film may get bored and begin skipping. Or, because it's in the home, it may be viewed by people with quite an obsessional approach to certain kinds of material who view certain scenes over and over and over again because they are particularly fixated on certain kinds of experience.
But we're here mainly to talk about Bad Lieutenant's spiritual, particularly Catholic themes of guilt and of Christ's embodiment of redemption. So if you've ever wondered if you're a bad person or what makes a bad person, if you've ever wondered whether or not you were good enough for God to love you, if you ever wondered if even the worst types of people can be redeemable, then I have a movie for you. For those of you that are new here, which is awesome by the way if you're new, this is Psychology in Movies and I am Movie Review Justin. I was heavily inspired by the great Rob Ager over at Collate of Learning and love talking about movies. Sometimes I find like a little psychology buzzword and look for movies to use as examples for that word or concept. Like here's one I did for the concept of mirroring using the movie Treasure Planet. Sometimes I do stuff like that. Sometimes I also do deeper dives into movies like I did for Hellraiser and for Blood In, Blood Out, which, as of right now, hasn't been released yet. By the time you watch this video, hopefully it will be out though. I'm gonna do a deeper dive today because this topic is so complex and complicated that it will take a bit to go over. So buckle up and get popcorn, smoke if you're gonna do that, and let's get into a discussion about one of my favorite films ever. I almost can't believe that I'm finally doing this. So I have to give special context. I was going to keep it private, but I think it's important to my interpretation of the film. And that is, I used to be a pretty bad alcoholic. In fact, movies were a big help towards my recovery and gave me something positive to do with my time instead of getting drunk and damaging my body. Even before I really got into movies and started writing articles for my little Facebook group, back when I was really deep in the middle of my alcoholism, I found myself watching this movie a lot, especially when I was depressed or disappointed with myself. Something about this movie, the Catholic imagery, the fact that the main character wasn't just this spineless pushover victim of bad things happening to them as a result of their drug use. He was more in charge of his own life, even if a lot of his decisions were wrong or bad. There's this humor where you can only laugh because it's so real and relatable. And then, of course, this sort of bizarre and paradoxical quality of the movie. Like, why is there so much Catholic imagery? What are we supposed to take seriously? And what are Abel Ferrara and his character trying to say with this film? It was such an interesting fidget to me that I've watched and meditated upon this movie extensively. Even listening to the director commentary track all the way through, where Abel Ferrara and his cinematographer talk about the shoot and their inspirations.
I'm Abel Ferrara. The only reason I'm here is because I'm getting $5,000. I got $5,000 cash.
For context, this movie follows a police lieutenant, and they never tell us his name. This gives him this sort of anonymous quality to him that he could be any sort of regular person out there leading a completely different life behind closed doors. And it follows him during the last few days of his life right before he dies, which are like this epic and surreal mountain of self-destruction, with little regard for how it will affect anyone else. And this guy is crazy. He is Bad Lieutenant. They don't call him that for nothing. The only movies that I can think of that come close are Uncut Gems and Good Time, which are both directed by the Safdie brothers. I like those movies, and I like this one too, but they're definitely not for everyone. Although I feel, ironically, it should be spiritual people that meditate on this movie. Anyways, Bad Lieutenant, he does it all. Drinking while driving, gambling, degenerate gambling. If you can smoke it, Bad Lieutenant, he'll smoke it. Doing cocaine in a school zone, robbery, sexual extortion, armed extortion, masturbating in public, mishandling of evidence, intoxicating himself at a crime scene and at a church, damage to federal property. Ugh, you can just go on and on and on, but do you get the gist of it? And do you think I'm making this shit up? Do you think he's not Bad Lieutenant? This is one of the most outlandish, outrageous, and yet believable and honest depictions of a person with addiction and that double life that comes with it that I've ever seen. I think it captures it a lot better than Requiem for a Dream, just because he's not this hapless victim of circumstance as someone in that movie, or like a Robert Downey Jr. in Less Than Zero. Even though Bad Lieutenant is saturated with Catholic imagery, those other movies feel a lot more preachy to me, because those victims of addiction are otherwise good people that just get swept up in addiction. This movie doesn't infantilize Lieutenant in this way. And I can't even use the word struggle because he's not resisting at all, but he's in the depths and throes of addiction. I think the only person that even comes close to this level of depravity might be someone like Jeffrey Epstein, or maybe Bender from Futurama, but Bender is a lot more shameless. You'll see what I mean as I go along. So the major through line of the whole plot of Bad Lieutenant follows LT making these terrible bets on the LA Dodgers. Hey, coincidentally, they just won the World Series in real life. But in the plot of the movie, they aren't winning, and so it ends up being this festering problem. One of many festering problems he has. A sort of B-plot is that a nun gets, well, I guess you can't say the word on YouTube. Two guys forced themselves on this nun, and a $50,000 reward is offered to arrest the suspects. This little inclusion subplot takes this from just being 90 minutes of drug-fueled indulgent depravity and elevate it into a sort of morality mirror for this character. He has to make choices that show who he really is deep down. The thing with the nun and the $50,000 actually did happen in real life. Abel Ferrara was inspired by a real event that happened in New York in the 80s, and the fact that he's Catholic himself no doubt triggered him to these topics. The detective who solved the case is actually right here in the movie. There he is. Bo was a detective, and now he's turned into a movie consultant to help studios get little details about their movies correct. So good job, Bo, solving that case and helping us by working on so many great films. What about our theme of Catholicism and redemption? Well, for one, the movie is saturated with religious imagery, particularly Catholic, and of Jesus, who was the symbolic figure of redemption. I think some of the themes are more unique to Catholicism in particular, both culturally but also morally specific, especially with the case of Catholic guilt, which I'll get into later. And if the prominence of religious imagery and figures such as nuns and priests weren't enough, Jesus himself shows up during the climax of our film for one last display to hammer the point home. If Jesus were just an incidental or ironic part of the plot, there's no way that he would have actually shown up near the end. So it's clear that director Abel Ferrara and screenwriter Zoe Lund were trying to share some sort of message. I don't think what I'm saying is groundbreaking or controversial. Even the British censors applauded the spiritual messages and that component of this picture. But it's not like this is a hidden theme that I'm the only person that noticed. Audiences in general have documented their understanding of that theme within the movie, although I've never seen anybody go in depth with an explanation beyond the surface level acknowledgement that it exists. There's a lot of components to this movie, and to understand our main theme of Catholic redemption, we're going to have to go over other components and themes within the film, and we're even going to be talking about the structure of the movie, and then we're going to be talking about Catholicism as well, and some of its tenets for this movie to make total sense. So we have a lot to talk about. And I had it in order, but I decided to change all of that and might even change it again. So we're just going to go forward and start with the plot synopsis. So our movie starts off with some seemingly out-of-place baseball commentary and then drops us off in front of the lieutenant's house. Our film takes place in 90s New York and follows around an unnamed police officer, like I said earlier. We start out not really knowing anything about him, we're just kind of dropped off, but somewhat slowly major details about the lieutenant start to trickle out. The first thing we learn about him is that he's a father and family man. And he's definitely a part of the middle class because he can afford to take his kids to private Catholic school and he owns his own home. He's a typical guy. Now, from the offset, he's definitely a tough, just grouchy sort of asshole of a dad. But other than that, everything seems normal. It seems like he loves his kids, that his kids love him. And then 3 minutes in and we're already introduced to our other major character of the movie, drugs. The thing to note here, or in any of the drug scenes, is that he keeps it secret and hidden for the most part from family or from work. We always see him sneak off, or hurry to sneak off before he does any of his drugging, which is what I meant earlier by living a double life. Hiding his habits is definitely so people are less likely to protest or interfere with his drug use, which later on they do. But that automatically and intrinsically has to raise his levels of shame and self-consciousness, just by default. Anything that you have to hide fills you with fear and shame. But the movie moves along and we're given another scene where a lieutenant shows up to work where he's a police detective. Our takeaway here is that he's given a lot of freedom and they don't track his activities throughout the day. And it's also very clear Bad Lieutenant's personal motives are not to work hard or be a good police detective. Just through observing him, we see that he has no passion for police work and the only time he is excited is when he's taking bets from his fellow officers. The rest of the time he's just going through the motions and pretending to look busy. By now we're getting introduced to the gambling aspect. Bad Lieutenant goes through the trouble of collecting and placing several bets. Hey, check out this guy real quick. Did you know that he wasn't an actor or extra that was instructed to do whatever the hell this shady shit is? A lot of this film was shot guerrilla style, meaning that they didn't have permits or anything like that, so they just shot on location in New York. Interestingly, it seemed like no one in New York City cared or even noticed that there were all these cameras and just ignored them, as opposed to staring into the camera or ruining shots. And then they would get random interesting shit like this on camera. What the hell is this guy doing with that bag? Anyway, Lieutenant notably and ironically bets against the advice that he gave his fellow officers. He spends like 2 minutes explaining to them why they should bet on the Mets as opposed to the Dodgers. And his reasons actually kind of make sense and are sort of compelling. So it almost didn't make any sense that his own personal bets were an opposite and that he spent more time and effort trying to convince everyone else than he did doing any actual police work. So it's a mystery. But this just goes to show that he has no strong connection or compassion to his fellow officers, because he clearly doesn't have their best interest at heart. That to him, they're just bozos and fools to take advantage of. So the police force is not where his unity or brotherhood or virtue lie, despite his familiarity with these people. My only reasoning I could come up with for why he changed his own bet is because he either wanted to bring good business to his bookie, or in the event that he lost, he could use their winnings as insurance somehow. So figuratively and literally, he's hedging his bets. But I'm not totally sure, and maybe Lieutenant isn't even totally sure, because it's clear in certain parts of the movie he's not really using his best thinking. The film advances again, and he chases what seems to be a suspect, only to find him smiling and waiting for him so they can do business together. Another large component of how the lieutenant operates is his use of Chinese spy. Chinese spy is where you try to convince someone to do something that they shouldn't be doing, and then you blackmail them and tell them, hey, if you don't do any more favors for me, I'm gonna tell on you, and you're gonna be arrested. It was basically Jeffrey Epstein's whole career of getting people to voluntarily break laws and then trading his silence for political favors and control. Bad Lieutenant is doing the exact same thing, where he's extorting this man to sell drugs for him and give him the profits in exchange for the lieutenant supplying him and then for looking the other way. Here he does it again in the same exact scene by yelling at the lady to stay back so she doesn't interfere with police business, and using his authority as a police officer as a shield to be corrupt and do whatever he wants. Some of our takeaways are that now we understand the lieutenant is completely corrupt, and he isn't just doing party drugs either. By doing hard drugs, he's actually embraced and started down a path of self-destruction. That he doesn't even really care about himself, and he should definitely know better. Of course, this is one of the first times that we see him use in front of someone else, and this guy actually does seem genuinely worried and concerned for him. The lieutenant just brushes it off and dismisses it, and what's the other guy supposed to do? Threaten to turn him in? So that scene ends, and then he meets these two other ladies that I'm guessing are prostitutes. So LT spends the whole night partying with these girls, but the mood isn't exactly full of merriment. It's a lot more somber, and him and his two companions stumble about like babies. And then there's this scene, which looks kind of visually like this. It's very interesting because they are supposed to be celebrating, but we can tell that Bad Lieutenant doesn't seem very happy. We can tell that the drugs have damaged him enough to where he's in anguish from overindulging. Here, Bad Lieutenant is laying himself bare for us, the audience, to see, and we are given a very honest front seat as to what his life is like. That he's lonely, overwhelmed, numb, and tired. I think it's representative to us and whichever pain that we might have within inside of ourselves that we would like to numb out or flee from. And it's also representative of the concept of God's love, which I'll get more into later. But that the sun shines on all of us, that it shines on the wicked and the righteous alike, and that even these evil people like Bad Lieutenant both have pleasure and pain. But there's no time to ponder about it too much because now we're at this scene. Bad Lieutenant is sent to a convenience store to investigate a robbery, but instead senses some opportunity and ends up keeping the stolen money for himself. Once again, he uses his Chinese spy strategy of extorting people by threatening them with jail implicitly. It's an implicit threat. The reason I bring up this scene is for these two little details. Look how he fucking tears open this box. He didn't even open it right. He can't be bothered. It just shows that he has such contempt for everything. Like, let me explain. It would be one thing if he did drugs in his own privacy, if he gambled in his own privacy, he's selling drugs, whatever, but at least you can compartmentalize those things. Now he's ripping off ordinary people. He's affecting people that have families and children just like him, so it shows that he has no empathy or decency. We continually have our level of moral respect be lowered for this guy. Anyway, from there he goes on to do more drugs, and so he goes to meet this lady. Wait a second, is that a Diet Coke? Doesn't he know how terrible those are for you? So here's the actual writer of the screenplay and movie. Neat, huh? She was in another awesome movie that I love about this lady that goes crazy and ends up shooting a bunch of guys. At first, most of the guys deserve getting shot, and then she decides that every guy she sees deserves it. It's a very interesting movie on gender relations. In real life, she ended up dying of congestive heart failure, brought about by cocaine use. Zoe Lund once said regarding spirituality in an interview,
I never lost my religion. I have always had a certain increasing awareness of religion. I do believe that the gospel is the ultimate story. What is amazing about the book is that over the millennia, the gospel has become so refined to the point where the Christ story does present a very refined and highly charged model for the search for truth. We can use the book as a basis for our own path to spirituality and grace.
Here's the nun scene. It was supposed to have different music, but it got changed so the scene would be less sexually fetishistic and charged, and more dramatic and tragic. How terrible. Showing that there is true senseless evil in the world. But let's go look at the forces that are supposed to go fight this evil. Here he is, drunk and passed out, ignoring his kids. Sleeping like a baby without a care in the world. Anyway, it's the next day. Oh yeah, and let's see how that bet with the Dodgers is going. Heyo! Looking good. Oh shit. I love his face here and just the disappointment to where he's literally sick with what happened. And I also love all the judgmental looks everyone else gives him. Well, I guess that's why you shouldn't gamble. Maybe he'll stop. Soon it's nighttime all over again, and Bad Lieutenant is back on the prowl like an animal going on his nightly hunt. He's about to stumble into a pretty good score, but it gets away, probably because Lieutenant is so drunk that he stumbles, dropping a huge bag of cocaine that he could have kept for himself. Here he is admonishing himself because even he knows that he missed out because he wasn't focused and needs to not mess around so much. The other detectives from earlier are gathered, and interestingly they are all pouring vodka into their cups, which, ironically, Bad Lieutenant doesn't participate in, but this shows that the police fraternity kind of normalizes drinking on the job, and this helps camouflage Lieutenant's own drinking and drugging habits. One officer shows his anger and disgust for the nun assault, but the lieutenant douses any sort of empathy or humanity by pointing out that the church turns a blind eye to other girls who get attacked every day, so why should they care? He's contemptuous of every institution and flaunts it. He's what has been a plague on countless societies, a corrupt and self-serving bureaucrat that's just using the system for his own gain. It finally gets a reaction from this officer, but it's all swept under the rug as sarcasm or dark humor so they can move on back to gambling, where, once again, Bad Lieutenant advises them to bet on the Mets, contrary to his own secret betting, so he hasn't learned anything whatsoever, and he has no regrets. So here's the hospital scene. He goes to the hospital to see if he can interview the nun, but here she is with doctors. She's shown in a very compromising situation, nude, and instead of the LT respecting this and the sanctity of this, of course, he's lieutenant, so he peeps, until the nun catches him staring. And then look, instead of looking away, this actually intrigues him further. Think about it from her perspective. Here, she's finally supposed to be safe, and yet this guy is kind of showing her that all men are the same because he's just staring at her and treating her like an object or a piece of meat. He keeps staring despite her noticing, but once they cover her up, he loses interest, and so then he's back on the prowl looking to do more evil. The reason I'm going through so much detail is because I think the juxtaposition of that last scene and this next one are very important. So right as he just left the hospital and he heard the terrible specifics of that awful attack on the nun, instead of that inspiring some sort of empathy or humanity or compassion in him, he goes right out and he sexually assaults these next two girls. I'm not going to go too into this scene for obvious reasons to those that know, but the point is that him seeing the devastation and aftermath of what just happened to the nun did nothing to move his heart towards sympathy or empathy. Quite the opposite. It created this craving and hunger in him to experience that level of control and inflict that level of degradation. There's like nothing redeemable about this person, and it just continues. Every time something happens that should inspire him to have humanity or do the right thing, it always has the opposite effect. Whenever people do anything to approach him, he doubles down. Whenever the tender things of life, like family or children, enter into the periphery, instead of wanting to chase that, he wants to run off where he can escape and be free and be alone to do drugs. And he thinks he's got life all figured out, which is why we see him carry himself with this demeanor and why he's constantly betting everything that he has away with so much confidence, so much unwarranted confidence. The only real times he does show compassion is to this one inanimate object, a statue of the Virgin Mary, which is ironic because first of all, it's not real. And you're not supposed to be touching a crime scene. Why is it so important for him to restore this statue to honor, especially when he treated those two real girls so terribly? He's treated everything and everyone horribly, including himself. What does he care about this inanimate statue? Anyway, he has to ditch the church and his fellow officers so he can hide his drinking and drugging yet again, and he's back listening to Game 5. You might remember this scene from the intro. Do you think it will go his way? The presence of Catholicism in this film serves two functions in my opinion. The first is that it establishes Bad Lieutenant is aware enough to where that he should know better. When it comes to drinking and drugs, as a police officer who has seen everything, he should know enough to know that he's supposed to stay away. And he's been involved enough with the church to where he should aspire to be a better person. But those things haven't impacted him, so he goes about seeking those things that he should be getting through duty and spirituality. It's called the God-shaped hole in Christian rhetoric. It refers to idolatry, which is trying to fill a large void within us with things or escapism. Listen to what Blaise Pascal has to say about it. He was a person that lived in the 17th century and was one of the first writers about the God-shaped hole. It's kind of neat and beautiful sounding.
What does this craving, and this helplessness, proclaim but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are, though none can help, since this infinite abyss can only be filled with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself.
All of this drinking, drug use, and other addictions like gambling or sex are related to the God-shaped hole that this character has, which he tries to fill with everything else, mainly the fleeting, carnal, and sensual experiences related to drugs, sex, and gambling. The other function of Catholicism within the film, and this is my theory, is that it shows the proxy for God's love, which rains down on all of us regardless of our own perceived notions of worthiness. Even though Bad Lieutenant loses all of his bets, which maybe he feels are an act of God, he doesn't recognize anything else that happens as a possible positive intervention by God. He only recognizes the negative, and instead of taking accountability, he blames God. Despite this, like a mother or father's love, the love of the Creator continues to shine down upon the Lieutenant as several characters serve as proxies for Jesus or for angels. I literally mean that within the context of the story, other characters that interact with the Harvey Keitel character might be secret angels, and they all show love for Bad Lieutenant in different ways. Even though he may not like it, some reproach him out of concern. Some help him with his criminal endeavors. Others just hang out and party with him. Either way, I think these are all instances of God loving, protecting, and helping Bad Lieutenant, and also actually enjoying him and having fun spending time with him. I think this lady here represents a mother's love, one of the most pure, positive things there is on this earth. Here, Zoe Lund's character represents God's complete and total compassion. She's the only one who truly gets Bad Lieutenant and understands him down to his bones. She sees how suffering and tired he is, and that his lifestyle and the drugs were an escape, now they are eating away at him. She sees all of his frustrations and insecurities and ignorance, and embraces him anyway, identical to the figurehead of Jesus who commanded all people to come unto him, regardless of station or circumstances in life. I think his dealer represents protective angels trying to help him, and even his bookie who's like this archetype of a concerned friend. And if you observe the roles of women in this movie, you see that they always fit into the Madonna or whore archetypes. That's where women either represent purity, goodness, and cleanliness, or alternatively, they represent thirst and sexual urges. The fact that he can't reconcile between the two, and he can only put women in one of those two categories, is part of the Lieutenant's pain and frustration as well. Another part of his spiritual sickness is that he can't have a meaningful and complete relationship with the woman because his own mental limitations, and because he puts women in one of those two boxes, neither of which sets him up for true compatibility with the lady. Without a companion to share his life with, there's a loneliness and frustration which he tries to fill through addiction. The women that he puts in the Madonna category are symbolic of judgment for all of his iniquity and dishonesty. They reflect his lack of purity. The ones that he can't see as pure and only as sex objects represent an exciting but dehumanizing aspect of himself, of wanting to numb out certain parts of himself. Here's where it gets interesting, because notice who he views as a sexual object: the nun and the two underage girls. A lot of his true sexual fetish is wanting to numb himself to the outside world. By sexualizing the nun and the two underage girls, he is numbing himself to the last bastions of morality that he has. Protections to the morally virtuous, protections to the weak and helpless, and protections towards family and other precious things. He's denouncing all of those things through his sexual expression. And let me tell you something real quick. We express a lot of who we are through our sexual preferences and our interests. So if you are drawn to people that are very volatile, or unreliable, or dishonest, something about you is wanting to be expressed and is looking for the environment with which to express and resolve it. All hail Freud and Gottman! So what the hell is the deal with baseball and with the gambling then? Remember how the theme of baseball is technically the first thing we are introduced to right in the beginning of the film? There's a few things. First off, coming back from a 3-0 deficit ties into our themes of redemption, and the fact that LT has had so many chances to course correct is indicative of God's mercy within the film, because he gave Lieutenant at least 4 chances that we see to stop gambling or do the right thing. Maybe bet the other way. There's so many things he could have done differently, and that's not including the millions of other things that do go the Lieutenant's way. Basically, each time he avoids getting into trouble could be interpreted as divine protection or intervention. Anyway, a team struggling to climb back into a series while another finds ways to lose parallels Lieutenant's own journey of letting his own life slip away one bad decision at a time. In particular, Daryl Strawberry, who gets specifically named frequently, parallels Bad Lieutenant in so many ways. First of all, not to throw Daryl under the bus, but he has had his own battles with addictions as well. His character serves as a reminder that it rains upon the wicked and just alike. Sometimes the Dodgers lose, and Daryl played great and there was nothing he could do. Sometimes they lose and it's all his fault. This is the same for all of us, and all of us are on this life journey of figuring out what's not our fault and what we actually can influence or control, something Lieutenant really struggles with, which I'll get into later. The thing about gambling is noteworthy though, because gambling is often described as the most degenerate addiction to have. The horror stories that I've read from people working at casinos, or videos I've seen of people having complete meltdowns. And sports betting is totally different. I want to share a little clip of Artie Lang talking about his days gambling. You can tell this guy's lived a Bad Lieutenant sort of lifestyle. Let's play it.
Donald used to do this thing called lightning bet, which is literally heroin for gamblers. The under-over for the basketball game is 180 points, which that means the total amount of points that each team scores has to come total over 180. Then you win. Or is below 180, you lose. You assign an amount of money to each point that the bet goes over or under. It means if you lightning bet $1,000 on an over at 180, once you hit the over, I get the chills saying this, once you hit the over, every single basket that gets hit in the game, you win $1,000. A basket from the field is $2,000. A 3-pointer's $3,000. So like the shakes you start to get, they're visible. It's almost like, you're having a conniption. And every time a shot goes up, it's like $1,000, $2,000. And to me, it's the purest form of degenerate gambling I've ever seen.
So in regular betting, it's just luck and random chance. When you bet on sports, you are betting on your understanding of the game. You're betting on your own intuition and ability to perceive reality. There's more egotism attached. That's why Lieutenant takes his gambling with an almost religious seriousness that he should be saving for other aspects of his life. But he does so because it's symbolic to him of betting on himself, on his own intelligence and understanding of the world. And by him losing, it starts to eat away at his faith in himself and his confidence to be able to see things correctly. Here's a biblical colloquialism. Despite his constant poor decisions, he starts to see the writing on the wall, and that his days are probably numbered. If you've never heard where that phrase, writing on the wall, comes from, you should look it up. It's a really interesting biblical story. The last thing is that baseball is unique in that it's one of the few sports that keeps track of errors, which is a stat where someone underperformed and wasn't able to do what was expected of them. And it's one of the most statistically comprehensive games, where they literally keep stats about everything, including every matchup, so it's very easy to dissect why a team lost, or what things they need to work on. There's so much the LT could have done differently, and at parts he was so close to everything going his way, that this parallels how we can scrutinize sports games in the same way that we can scrutinize each other. Meaning, scrutiny is okay if it is objective and dispassionate, if its only goal is to find a way to win. Sports are an annual experiment on which mindset, which culture, whose stories are most important for building a winning culture, and that's why they are a crucial social service, because they give us our own models of success that we can emulate. So that's my little rant on sports. Not to sound like Rob Ager, but the first thing to notice is that this movie takes a very minimalist approach at its opening. We aren't given any panning views of scenery typical in most films. but instead a simple white background credits roll alongside what we quickly gather is a radio baseball program. The film is intentionally inviting us to meditate and hypnotizing us. The director, Abel Ferrara, was aware that he could capitalize on the mind's ability to focus when there's minimal distractions. There's no visual to tie the audio in, and the audio itself is vague as to how it's relevant to the plot. If you sat down in theaters, which would have been difficult because of the NC-17 rating, but if you did, you might be confused when the movie starts because the audio has nothing to do, seemingly, with what's going on. But that's the genius, because the lack of other details and the fact that your mind scrambles for meaning whenever it can't find any draws us into trying to formulate our own meaning. It's turning our brains on. Other than that, the movie is shot in vignette style, which are brief episodic little segments loosely linked. Keyword loosely. The movie kind of follows a Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now formula, where it starts off dark but then gradually gets darker and darker and more depressing, where the temperature as to the shocking and disturbing factor are gradually increased as the film progresses. But all of these properties are so hellish, we're never really quite sure where the movie's real rock bottoms are, so to speak. Like, which particular thing is the worst thing Bad Lieutenant has ever done, and if this is progressively getting worse and worse, or if it's been this way for years or decades. For how much terrible stuff you see the Lieutenant do, you never see him get home safely. We never get that tension release in the movie. Every scene starts out, tension is gradually raised, we're left with a lot of concern and questions, but then it just moves on to the next scene, skipping the resolution and tension deflation we are used to. So this movie feels just like one tense, sickening, and frustrating experience. But I love this movie. Even though I meant every word of what I just said, I think this movie's awesome. So, towards the end of the movie, when it becomes clear, you know what, no matter what happens to this guy, if the Dodgers win, if he gets 50 grand for solving the nun case, let's say that he wins the lottery, no matter what happens to this guy, it's only a matter of time until something else bad happens to him, and it's very likely that he's going to do it to himself. If we examine all of his future possibilities, all of them have a high likelihood in something major and bad happening to him. I think the scene where Jesus shows up... Wait, hold on, backing up just a minute. So Bad Lieutenant is down in a bad way, and he needs to figure out who raped the nuns so he can turn them in and collect the reward. He doesn't give a shit about the nun or the two boys, but he needs to find out how he can get that money, along with his drug money, to make his next move, either to pay off large or flee. Or maybe use the notoriety of helping that nun to get more protection. Maybe make yourself too difficult and public of a figure to murder without there being heavy repercussions. Whatever he's going to do, in his mind he needs to solve this case and get the money so he can do it. So he approaches the nun, but that gets him nowhere. He tries to manipulate and guilt her into telling him, but he ends up just painting himself into a corner. The more that he complains that they shouldn't be forgiven, the more that it's clear that he's probably just really talking about himself. That he's done just as bad of things, and he's going to continue doing bad things if no one stops him, so he shouldn't be forgiven either. Cue the Jesus scene. So here he is kneeling, and he's just losing it. He's going through emotional catharsis. A lot of big feelings here. But the biggest feeling is that God has turned his back on him with everything going wrong. Now, if you watch this movie and listen to this review so far, you see that God's love and mercy have been all around LT this entire time. He sent him friends to give him honest counsel, a family to love and support, and to steer him on the right path, a job which has meaning. Even people that understand him, like spending time with him, and embrace him for who he is. But because God won't force the outcome of one measly baseball game, Bad Lieutenant breaks down into hysteria. So Jesus is silent in this scene, because we know that Jesus could, and maybe should, light into Bad Lieutenant and point out all of his iniquities, especially if we're looking for someone to blame. But he doesn't do that. Whether Lieutenant's apology is genuine or performative and contrived is up for you to decide. I think it's a degree of both. But we see Jesus is really here to extend mercy to him, and we get a huge piece of evidence that many side characters, like this elder black lady, are really just Jesus in disguise. Here she gives LT the cup that was stolen from the cathedral, thus allowing him to track down the suspects and arrest them and finally get that reward money. There's two things about this scene. The first is the classic concept of Catholic guilt, and this is not like an official part of their doctrine or anything, but it's just a byproduct of some of their beliefs. So the idea is, Catholics believe humans can be led astray and descend into depravity, and self-destruction and madness, especially in the absence and separation from God or in the presence of sin. They feel that the closer one is to God, the more sensitively they feel guilt, and so feeling guilt is a sign of spiritual awareness and the desire to improve. But the opposite, it can make some people seem neurotic or performative, wringing their hands dramatically over incidental flaws. And then there's the trope of the bad Catholic and their guilt. The idea of the bad Catholic is that the bad Catholic lives in sin until the very last moment, and then on their deathbed, they renounce all sin and show some sort of performative guilt before embracing forgiveness. But it's like, deep down you know that if they could go back to sinning, that's exactly what they would do. They use loopholes and empty platitudes like, well, no one is perfect, to excuse their gross misconduct, equating someone's failure to self-improve something minor versus having to improve something major like honesty or responsibility. Here, Bad Lieutenant tries to do the old bad Catholic trick. Really, he's been bluffing through the whole movie. And he tries to blame Jesus for putting him in this predicament, as if Bad Lieutenant has been doing everything possible to do the right thing, and too many things were outside of his control to save him. But that's not what happened at all. Literally, Bad Lieutenant hasn't done even one thing, and so it's laughable that he curses at Jesus and says he has to do everything when he hasn't done a damn thing. Each time he was supposed to do something, he did the wrong thing instead, and Jesus sees right through it but extends mercy anyway. The thing about all of these scenes, and every scene in the movie really, is its depiction of free will. We can really only tell someone's true free will when we see them in multiple states. If they're only sorry because they got caught, or only do something for personal gain, then we're not really seeing their true persona. By allowing the lieutenant to find the two boys that raped the nun, we're seeing what the LT would really do if no one's looking, so to speak. You could argue that he's in desperation mode, but you could also argue that delivering him that chalice was a message from God telling him that the slate had been wiped clean, and that he could continue on as normal if you turn them in and collect the reward. So why does Lieutenant let them go then? It's part of Lieutenant exercising his free will. If you remember from any of the drugging scenes, it brought him numbness and something to fill his time, but not with happiness. It came with a lot of pain and struggle and loneliness. It was eating away at him, and so he could never really fully embrace it. It was more of his escape from family and work. It was always his excuse to sneak away and not have to really try at being a father or being a real detective. And yet, something about him just didn't connect with his family, his job, or religion either, so he had nowhere to go. He was prepared to give up on all of those things as well. He never quits being self-destructive. That stays the same. But he does finally find something bigger than himself to believe in, and that's what allows him to make the ultimate Christ-like sacrifice at the end of the film, and do it of his own free will. Because he begins to believe in free will, and by extension the possibility of goodness, this allows him to let Julio and Paulo go. He's given up on himself. He's accepted himself as self-destructive, but finally finds two people to empathize with. He sees so much of himself in these two younger men that he can finally express a lot about how he feels about himself. He's angry at himself, tired at himself, but by doing this he's acknowledging a sort of redemptive nature that he had to martyr himself to find. Until this point he's probably known at some times that the world might be better off without him. But now he knows that that isn't true, that a lot of people are going to miss him, and that he had even more positive impact than he probably believed, even if he had to die to find out. That's the point of this movie. It's a person who slowly gives up on himself, but then at the very end and through the miracle of Christ, discovers and embraces his self-worth right at the very end. It gives him something bigger than himself to believe in, and give him the courage to lay down his life and therefore be redeemed. It's just really hard to understand, just like our own sins and iniquities are hard to understand and reconcile. But the good news is, we don't have to wait till the last minute like Bad Lieutenant to be redeemed. At any point we can choose to follow God and be on our righteous path. I was an alcoholic for 10 years, drinking about 15 beers a day. But 6 years ago, I started going to addiction recovery, and I also started watching videos instead of binge drinking, so I went from drinking 15 or 20 beers a day to maybe about 2 or 3, and eventually quit altogether. And the entire time my dream was to one day make YouTube videos. Before I ever made a single video, I knew that I wanted to make videos, but I also wanted to practice by writing articles first. And I've probably written like over 100 articles by now. And that's where my Facebook group came in. I felt if I could practice writing, and more importantly, practice watching movies with an eye for sussing out hidden themes or messages, that eventually I could be writing my own videos like I'm doing now. That practice and repetition really helped being able to understand and get more out of a movie. Bad Lieutenant was such a Justin-defining essential for a while because of its messages regarding addiction and redemption. It was such an important part of my life, and I would watch it with such strong but mixed emotions such as guilt, frustration, denial, amusement, and mystery. There was a day not too long ago where I never thought I would be doing this because I was so deep in addiction, but I always dreamed of doing this. So it is my honor to cover this movie and these topics for you today. This is Psychology in Movies, and I am Movie Review Justin. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you got this far, and I'll be back with more videos and ideas. And if you want to chat about movies, please do so in the comments as it helps with my engagement. And please like, subscribe, and share as this helps encourage me and helps the channel reach more people. Thanks for watching, stay healthy and informed.
Game in the mall.